This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Tonight's topic is focused on teacher preparation and what role it plays in preparing educators who are responsible for teaching over 50 million students across the country. We know that as we listen to this or watch it right now, September is technically when we start school. Some states, of course, start in August. But how we start school in 2020 is radically different than it was at any other point in American history. Even with the 1918-19 pandemic, not all schools were closed. This is a very unique time, but this is a very unique conversation for educators because, again, we're asking them to do something different that maybe our schools did or did not prepare them for. But rather than me talk about it, I'm going to give us an opportunity to talk to 5 people who know a great deal about this. And what I'll do is just ask everyone to introduce him or herself, name, where you're located, a couple of things about yourself, and then we'll start the conversation. So we're going to start off with Jeanne.
Hi. So I'm Dr. Jeanne DelColle, and right now I am the Strategic Partnership Specialist at Stockton University, which means that I'm the person responsible for placing all of our candidates in the field and maintaining relationships with all of our partner districts. In a few weeks, I'll actually be transitioning to a new role as the Executive Director of the Center for Future Educators at the College of New Jersey.
Well, early congratulations to you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll turn to our friend from Mississippi.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stacy Donaldson, and I am an educational technologist at Belhaven University, and I also work with teachers pursuing board certification. I have been an educator for 22 years. That's my mile marker, my 22-year-old, and I'm an alternately certified teacher. I'm a broadcaster turned teacher, so teacher preparation is something that I did not have, so I'm very passionate about helping teachers get their feet wet, if you will, and making sure that as they go into the classroom, they're prepared to be the best teachers that they can be in a place, which conditions like in Mississippi. I'll be happy to talk about that here in just a little bit, but I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And National Board Certified Peggy Brookins, who's the president of the organization, has spoken to a couple of my events. She is a big champion for the work you do along the line. So thanks for sharing that. So to the person who may be the furthest west of Virginia, where I live, turn over to Chad.
I'm Dr. Chad Miller, and I'm a specialist at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where I work in the Institute for Teacher Education, as well as the Uehiro Academy for Philosophy and Ethics in Education. I always got to get a breath in there because the title's so long. Where my work is really working with pre-service teachers, also in-service teachers, but also those teachers who are in the field who are doing philosophy with their kids in public schools. Prior to taking this position in 2013, I was a high school teacher where I taught 10th and 12th grade students at Kailua High School. I was named the 2012 Hawaii State Teacher of the Year, and I am also National Board Certified. So I think this is my 17th year, and I don't have a mile marker because my kids are 1 and 2. So my mile markers aren't nearly there yet. Happy to be here though.
Well, as the father of a 27-year-old, your time is coming. And I earned my degree in philosophy, so it's always good to see philosophy leaving the classroom, higher ed, and going to younger people. Thank you. Turn over to Heidi.
Hi, I'm Dr. Heidi Welch. I am the Director of Music Education at Castleton University in Castleton, Vermont. This is my 25th year teaching. I spent 2 years at the beginning of my career teaching K-5 general music, 5th grade band, and 3rd through 5th grade chorus. Then I began teaching at the high school level in 1998, where I stayed for 20 years as the lone high school music educator in our little tiny rural community. I live in New Hampshire. And I had, over that course of time, probably, I think I was up to 19 student teachers and a variety of field experience students. And after I was named 2013 New Hampshire Teacher of the Year and finalist for National Teacher of the Year, I decided to take that step, thanks to Walden, and go for that PhD because I loved working with the pre-service students so much. So I primarily teach all of the ed courses. I do not have any ensembles right now. I miss that a little bit, honestly, and I place the student teachers and I do all of the evaluations for that, as well as I do facilitation for Ithaca College for some of their student teachers that want to student teach in New Hampshire. And I worked as an adjunct at Keene State College teaching the freshman music education majors their first philosophy class. So been at it a while. I can't believe it's 25 years, but I love every minute of it.
And I see a very nice musical instrument on your back wall.
There's a bunch in here.
Oh yeah.
There's.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're walking the talk, as they say.
And I apologize now, my son is playing right behind me. He's had a long day of remote.
Oh no, trust me, I've had children and other events, so no, you're all good. And if he wants to say hello, that's fine as well. So, and in fact, if you may be the only one from New England on, so good here. Now I'm going to turn over to Richard.
Hi everybody. I am Dr. Richard Warren. I work at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and I am the newly named Hazel Professor of Practice. My primary roles and responsibilities include supervising beginning teachers in the areas of science and STEM. And also I'm a director of initiative to recruit and develop male teachers of color. So my primary responsibilities on that end is to educate K through 12 men to become teachers. Prior to this moment, I am the 2019 Maryland State Teacher of the Year, and I'm incredibly excited to join you all today.
I'm a graduate of an HBCU, so it's always good to see the HBCU folks in place, and also used to work with Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and you're one of our member schools, so congratulations on all the great things you do. And now we're going to go to Deep South, to the state of Georgia, and Erica's going to tell us about herself.
Hello, I am Dr. Erica De Queir. As I mentioned before, I am here manipulating various systems of technology and some are refusing to work well with me. However, I am happy to be here. I am a professor of teacher education at Albany State University in South Georgia. I am also a coordinator of programs for middle and secondary education. I work not just with recruiting in our general area, but I also help to develop them in terms of curriculum, instruction, and assessment, working with students with diverse cultural needs. I also wear a lot of different hats. In addition to that, I do work at an HBCU. So those of you guys who work at HBCUs, you know we wear a lot of hats. I'm a coordinator for a teach abroad program, and last year we went to Belize. This year we are going to be headed to Jamaica. So that's an exciting program that I'm happy to be a part of. That is a program where we focus on the teaching of those students who are both culturally and linguistically diverse. I also work as a fellow with the Center for Education Opportunity, and I develop quite a bit of research projects working with that effort. I am a Chancellor's Learning Scholar, so I work with the USG here in Georgia in order to coordinate faculty development sessions and faculty learning communities throughout USG here in Georgia. I was also Teacher of the Year for Albany State University and my college, so I work quite a bit in teacher training and development. So my area is the training of K-12 teachers, as well as college and university faculty in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, pre-service education, and most specifically the education of students with diverse needs, whether they be cultural, linguistic, or ability.
Excellent, thank you for that. And she's doing great work at the Center for Advancement Opportunity, which she mentioned, which received a $3 million grant, in fact, from an organization associated with TMCF, Center for Advancement Opportunity. All of you well accomplished. You've seen what it's like to be in the classroom, and now you're in a different position to influence the next generation of educators. Well, question for me, what attracted you to education, to become an educator in the first place? Because that'll kind of lead into the next question. And whoever wants to go first can.
Well, I'll go first.
All right.
Originally, the plan was not to become an educator. I wanted to be a physical therapist. And as I was applying to graduate school, just before I went to graduate school, I met a guy, his name was Kevin Taylor. And I met him at a meeting, and he was asking for men of color to come in and mentor some of the boys of color in schools who were having trouble. And just before I graduated from college, I told him, I said, hey, if I'm around, I'll come in and mentor. So fast forward, I applied to graduate school and certain things didn't work out in graduate school. And I remember being stuck without a job on my mother's couch, a place I did not want to be. And I remember just breaking down, having a moment, wondering, I did everything I was supposed to do in college, had a good GPA, everything. Why can't I land a job? Why can't I get on to the next step? And I remember Mr. Kevin Taylor calling me. He said, hey, Richard, are you still interested in mentoring some of the young men? And I said, Mr. Taylor, I'm all the way in New Jersey. You want me to come all the way to Maryland? I don't have a job. I'm trying to figure out my life. I just don't know, Mr. Taylor. And he said, well, Richard, have you ever considered being a substitute teacher? I can get you in as a substitute teacher. You can mentor some of our young men until you figure out what you want to do. So I packed up my 1996 Ford Taurus, threw my clothes in the trunk, and I drove all the way from New Jersey back to Maryland. And I substitute taught for 2 days. And they called me back again. And you know, as I was teaching, the principal comes in and she says, is everything all right? And I said, yeah, everything's fine. I'm trying to make the story quick, but this is a long story. And I said, yeah. And she looked, and the kids were actually listening to me when I was teaching. So fast forward, the third day, she calls me to her office and says, hey, Richard, one of our teachers won't be coming back for the rest of the year. Do you want to take over as a long-term substitute? So I said, okay, sure. I took the job, and as I was teaching, something amazing started to happen to me. I started to see pieces of my story in the kids that I taught, challenges that they had to overcome, obstacles that they were facing. And I started to see myself as a figure for them of hope. So at the end of the 7 months, they called me back down to the office and they said, Mr. Warren, you did a phenomenal job. And what you don't know is these kids have been through a series of 7 different substitutes before you. And their scores have been the highest among the county. And we want to keep you, and we want to make sure we pay for you to get your certification as a teacher. So I share that. That's why I became a teacher. I saw myself in the kids that I taught, and I was asked by a male educator of color. I saw myself in the classroom, and I saw that I could make a difference, and they supported me along the journey. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Great way to open. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm, as I said, an alternately certified teacher, and I was in the process working at a television station and was having a baby. And something about having a baby makes you think about every aspect of your life. And I was looking for God's purpose in my life. So I asked God, okay, so what did you design me to do with my career? And teaching, I believe, fell in my spirit. And while I was pregnant and going from different stories where they would send me to stories where I could eat for lunch, you know, nothing heavy. So I was going to eat. And I worked on my certification during that 9-month period. Did not know that I would go into the classroom after I had my first daughter. And I was on maternity leave for 10 weeks and started my first teaching job. And it was interesting. I thank God that I was a professional and I had experience, real world language arts experience. So I went in teaching English like I was at a TV station, and that was the one thing that saved me. I went straight into my master's program on an alternate route certification program. And during that time, I learned about board certification, which again was a motivation because I wanted to be an expert. And the rest is history. So I said I would never teach as well as a senior in high school. So when I started my first teaching job at my alma mater, my algebra teacher said, so you'll never teach, huh?
And here you are.
Yes, here I am, and love it's what I was designed to do.
And I appreciate both of you sharing where you started and then saying, here's my switch, because people, when they meet teachers, or we have teachers, we always assume they wanted to be a teacher, or they went directly from college into teaching versus having another career. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Who else wants to go?
I'll follow that up because my path, I wasn't supposed to be a teacher either. I didn't want to be a teacher. I'm a public school kid from the south side of Cleveland. Went to a big public school and could tackle people well enough to go to a Jesuit university to play football, a place where I probably didn't necessarily belong. But when I got there is actually when I started feeling like I learned what learning was again. Class sizes were small, 12 kids. We sat in a circle, we read books and essentially talked about them. And I wasn't good at it first because my public school education didn't really set me up to be a thinker per se. I think it set me up to do really well on tests and things of that nature. You know, we sat in rows and, you know, we had 40-minute classes and there's 37 kids in the class. And so when I went to John Carroll University on the east side of Cleveland, I go there and my world was kind of rocked and I realized I wasn't good at this thinking thing. And the athlete in me said, you're going to get better at this. And I kept taking philosophy courses because this was a philosophy course that I wasn't good at, and started really falling in love with the idea of like, oh, it's about asking questions. It's about hearing other people's perspectives. It's really about making meaning. That's what school's about. And so when I was graduating, I was asking how come I had to come to a private school, a private Jesuit institution, in order to get this type of education? How come this isn't the way that public schools are being taught? Because I think it could do wonders for our community in terms of building thoughtfulness and compassionate society. And there wasn't an answer. And I had a professor who said, I know there's a guy in Hawaii that's doing philosophy with kids. I don't know anything else about it. I knew I didn't want to go academic philosophy. I knew I wanted to really return to the public school. So I applied to graduate school and came out here. And I guess you could say the rest is history. Developed a relationship with Dr. Tom Jackson or Dr. J and several of my colleagues. And we just started working on how do we make this thing we call philosophy a pedagogy. And that's really kind of where I went right into the public school system because that's where I felt like my work, where I wanted it to be. And so, yeah, my path was, I wanted to play in the NFL. My body, my speed and quickness had other plans for me. And I'm just lucky that I had this opportunity to really learn what learning was like and be able to return and really shape what a public school education could be.
And you're a great example of the NCAA model that says most of our athletes will become pro in something other than sports. And now you're doing that.
Definitely.
Great story. Thanks for sharing. And now 3 for 3 for saying, I didn't want to teach. So now let's say we're going to have a 4th, 5th, and 6th. Or maybe not. Jeanne, what about you?
I didn't want to be a teacher. There you go.
4.
So when I was 16, I had an English teacher who told me I'd make a really good teacher someday. And I looked at him and I went, ugh, no way, no respect, no paycheck. Summer vacations are great, but no thanks. So I went to college and got a political science degree and couldn't decide whether I wanted to be an ambassador somewhere or get into international law. So I went and was actually working in a law firm in England and realized that there was just no joy in what I was doing. And so I ended up coming home. My mom had moved. I had no car. I was starting over again. I was out of college. And so my mom's property backed on to a local middle school. So I decided to go and substitute teach just to make some money. And the first day I walked in there, it was like I found oxygen. It was, the kids were insane. It was middle school. It was after spring break. They thought I was like fresh meat. And I had the best time ever. It was amazing. So I remember going home at the end of that day and flopping on the couch. And my mom looks at me because I had that glazed over look. And she's like, God, what'd they do to you? And I'm like, man, I don't know, but I'm going back tomorrow. And that was it. So I ended up going back to school, getting another degree in teacher education, became a social studies teacher. 24 years now I've been in education teaching, and Chad and I were actually in the same class of state teachers of the year. So it's been an amazing journey. And so when I became teacher of the year and sort of got outside of my own school district, and I taught in a place called Willingboro, for those of you from New Jersey. So, and I love Willingboro. It's where I grew up. It's where I spent 17 years of my teaching career. And my students never, ever looked anything like me. So, but they were my friends. They were my family. They were my neighbors. And so I really enjoyed working with diverse candidates. And so when I became teacher of the year and I started to go out there and visit other schools and other districts and see what was happening on a local and a state and a national level and realize the voices that were missing, I realized I needed to do something that had even more impact than what I was doing. And so I went to give a speech at my alma mater, and they recruited me to come back and change the fieldwork program. And so it hadn't really changed in the 20 years since I'd been there. So I kind of turned it up on its head. We created mentoring programs, we created outreach to teachers, we created co-teaching and invested in that. So it was an opportunity to do something, the next good thing, right? To move on and take that next step. But that perspective changing, getting out of my classroom was really, I think, what did it for me. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
And no pun intended, of course. And in fact, you are an ambassador, just in a different field. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So 4 for 4. Heidi, you gonna make it 5?
Break that mold.
Break the mold. Go ahead.
I always wanted to be a teacher. I came from a very, very poor family. We were homeless most of my childhood, moved around a lot. I grew up in the projects in New Hampshire. We even have the projects in Manchester. And we moved like 29 times between kindergarten and 5th grade in one town. And then we moved another 24 times in another town before I graduated high school. So I was always in transition, it seemed. But I loved to read, and I knew that the only safe place I had, it was a very abusive home. And the only safe place that I ever had was in school, because I knew that from the hours of 8 to 2, I was safe. So I poured myself into school and reading. Like, I was obsessed with reading, and I wanted to be an English teacher. So I knew that I was going to go to college, the first of many generations to go to college. And I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, but I thought I was going to be an English teacher. I wanted to teach Beowulf and Chaucer and Shakespeare and Old English. I was obsessed with that stuff. And so I ended up going to a state university, and I was in the band and chorus because I thought they would be fun. And that's another little side tale, was that my high school band director and chorus teacher were incredible. They were my parents. They had no children of their own, so we were their kids. And I didn't even start playing an instrument until my junior year of high school, because we could never have afforded instruments or lessons or anything like that. So they gave me a euphonium and sent me on my way. No, a euphonium is not a baby tuba. It's an instrument all by itself, but it looks like a tiny tuba. So I was this little 5'0" little tiny girl with this big hunk of brass, and it changed my life that day, because when I was in college, sitting in band, playing my euphonium for fun, a friend of mine that was sitting next to me said, "When are you going to be go up and sign up to be a music teacher, go into the music ed program?" And I said, "No way, no way. You guys are crazy. Like 150 some odd credits, you're carrying an overload every semester, ensembles up the wazoo. No way. I'm going to be an English teacher." And 2 days later, I was in the department head's office, and without hesitation, I said, "I think I might change my major to music education." And before I even got it out, he was on the phone with the registrar's office. And I'm so thankful that he did, because it got me out. And so I always wanted my classroom to be a safe space for those kids that need a champion. They need somebody to be there for them, somebody that they know is going to be there for them, and not judge them based on anything, but also hold them to high expectations and say, well, yeah, this is stinky, but guess what? There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and they know that I'm serious because I lived through a lot of what they were living through. So lots of challenges along the way, but I think that it was a calling for me, like similar to what Stacy said. There was something calling me from the time I was 8 years old to make a difference for kids later. And it was just a magical thing in my mind. That sounds so cheesy to say. I'm trying to find the right words, because I get kind of flummoxed when I'm thinking about those days when I was younger and thinking there would be no way I would be able to have an impact, much less get out of the projects, much less get out of the food lines and the bread lines and living out of our car. And here 25 years later, well, now 30 years later, after I started college, my life is incredibly blessed because of education and it's powerful.
Well, two things. First of all, thank you for opening up your personal life to us as well and those who are listening and watching. So thank you for that, because there's millions of people who are shaking their head when they watch or when they're listening. And second, you're showing a diversity of experience. You knew you wanted to be one, and so different from what we've heard. So thanks for bringing that in as well. And now we go down to DeCuir in Georgia.
Well, Heidi, I agree with you when you said that it's a calling. It's definitely not a job that anyone can do, and many parents are figuring that out now, thanks to school shutdowns because of COVID-19. My experience was similar to Heidi's in that I had a calling for it. I began teaching straight away from college. I actually was preparing to be a teacher since high school without knowing it. I was a part of a group of students who were chosen to be peer tutors to some of our fellow students in English and social studies, and particularly in help them develop their writing. And most specifically, we were preparing for college admissions essays. So they assembled a team of students to help provide some peer revision and review as we were preparing for our college admissions essays. And I've been working in that space since high school, since my junior year in high school, and continued doing some tutoring through college and working in after school programs. Although my major on paper was pre-law and history, I was preparing to be a teacher. So I've been preparing for this since high school, throughout college. And then when I graduated from college and realized if I wanted to be a lawyer, I would have to sell my soul to the devil, and figured out that it was probably best for me to continue teaching because being a lawyer just wasn't for me. And I began teaching straight out of college, and I never stopped. And I've now been teaching in the teaching field, I would say officially as a teacher for the last 19 years, although I don't look it, I look very good. I have actually been teaching, working with students since I was in high school. I was one of the peer teachers as they designated me. So it's been a calling, and it's something that I've prepared for my entire life.
One thing that connects all of you is the importance of institutions and people. And all of you have at least identified one person or an institution that said, here's the nudge. And Erica, you have, I guess, the youngest because you started in high school. And the founder of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture here at UVA is Dr. James Hunter. And a couple of his books are behind me now. But he often makes the point that you're hitting on. He says, we think that it's just one institution or one person who's responsible for the formation of who we become as people. And you're living examples that it's a multiple way, whether it's working with Black boys and teachers telling you this, or working as a anchor, or growing up in very challenging situations, being an athlete, deciding to do that, thinking you're going to become an ambassador and do it in a different way, and then also knowing in high school. So you've all fallen under that part. Answer this question for me. You're now in positions of authority where you can influence people. What are we getting right as relates to teacher preparation, and maybe what can we do differently to make it better? Not per se what we're doing that's wrong. What are we doing that's right, and what are we doing that could be better? And anyone can choose to jump in.
I think we're building partnerships so that pipeline from the high school to the junior college to the university, or the assistant teacher who we're partnering with junior colleges where that assistant teacher can earn a degree, if you will. I believe we're planting seeds that really is helping in a situation, because attrition, is one of the biggest problems or one of the biggest threats to education. Before I became a professor, I taught Teacher Academy. I had gone from the district and just became disconcerted with just the bureaucracy. And I'm like, I just want to teach. So I went back into the classroom and I taught juniors who very possibly wanted to teach at the Career and Technical Center. And I was amazed several years later when I was at the State Department of Education and facilitating a grant where National Board Certified teachers work with pre-service teachers and early career teachers in just literacy and improving skills in literacy. So just that connection of institutions knowing that there's got to be more than just the system to help groom educators. So I think we're getting that right.
And you bring in the role that community colleges, technical colleges, junior colleges, depending upon your state, are involved in. We'll come back to that. And I'm glad you mentioned attrition. And feel free to also explain what that means, because some people who will listen, we all know it as teachers, but the others may not. So we'll get back to that point.
Okay.
Let's jump in. What are we getting right?
I think one of the things that we're getting right is that we still have it. Oh, of course, my lights go out here. Is that we still have it. You know, in such a time when people are making cuts at universities, I mean, I think that it really shows where, you know, what our communities need. And that's the first thing. You know, I'm hoping that the results of the pandemic don't begin to cut these teacher prep programs and the work that we've done over the last, 10, 20 years. And the second thing that comes to mind on, I think, what we're doing right is there's been a move in evolution on what we teach. And what I mean by that is I think typically when you ask somebody, oh, you're a teacher, what do you teach? And their response is, I teach 7th grade math. But what I'm hearing and what I feel like the focus, just the whole like thinking about education differently is when you ask somebody what they teach, we ideally want them to say, I teach 15-year-olds from Kailua and Waimanalo. That's the first response. So really understanding where they teach and who they teach before the content. And I think that's one of the things I think that we're in the process of getting right, is the focus of what's important is shifting away from the canon and the content primarily to the children in which we're serving.
And that's a good point about the fact that we're still here, because if you look at the history and the founding of some public and private universities across the country, religion, teacher preparation were some of the early disciplines in place. And even here in Virginia, the College of William and Mary, one of the oldest schools in the country, remained open in part during the Civil War because the College of Education, School of Education, remained in place during that time. So thanks for bringing that in there.
Yeah, I think what we're getting right is the more holistic approach to teaching and learning versus the more academic approach, and finding that balance in between both. How do we focus on the holistic child at the same time, enrich them with the skills, the thought processes, and the knowledge to learn and to be productive citizens in their own right, whether it's college or career. I think what we're getting right is we're beginning to assess where we are in teacher preparation. What are the credentialing components that teachers must have? What does the certification process look like? What is the system in which we evaluate our teachers? Is it just based off of a test that they take, or is it a practice part that they have to do in person? So I think what's working now and what we're doing right is we are starting to take a step back and look at what we have done previously versus where we are now, and if that is effective or not. So we're having these conversations, we're reflecting on it. And I believe those are the two things that just pop out to me that we are doing right. We are starting to take a look back and see what needs to happen in order to move our teacher preparation forward. And we are starting to take a holistic approach.
And I'm glad you mentioned holistic, because when people think of education, schools, or prep, they think in 2020 that we're doing the same thing we did in 1920. And that's totally not true. So thanks for making that distinction for us.
I think that some other things that we're doing right as an arts educator and somebody that teaches and works with so many music ed students, it's very unknown to the rest of the ed department of my particular college. So starting to build those communications and connections with the general education department, and the other like phys ed and art education, and those, to see how many similarities we have, and also to inform some of the professors that are teaching ed collab or the things where they see all of the students of the differences in music ed students and their needs, as well as, because a a student that's going to become a math teacher has different needs than a student that's going to be a music educator or an art educator, and understanding that we're all educators, and people are starting to understand that music education is not a fluffy subject. It's highly demanding, and it's incredibly challenging, but it still seems to be under that guise of, well, it's so cute what you guys are doing, but we're hard to place in the field. We're harder to understand all of the commitments regarding credit hours, but we're starting to get better with that. So I think we're doing well in starting to put all of our educators on the same plane, as far as we're all valuable. We're all teachers first. Music just is the content area where we're providing. And I love what Richard was saying too about the balance. I think it was Richard that was talking about the balance, the holistic balance. But also I think what we're doing well is we're able to provide more in-class experiences for our students than we did 20 years ago. When I was doing field experiences in college, we didn't get out into the classroom until our junior year. And so now a lot of universities are starting to provide those connections with local schools and getting their students into the classroom earlier, even if it's observationally for once a week, and then sophomore year a little bit more. And so providing students with real classroom experiences as early as possible, so that way that when they get to their junior year, they're like, oh, I didn't realize this was what a real classroom was like. I don't want to do that. That's insane. And then they've wasted 3 years working towards something that they don't want to do anymore. So I think we're getting better at that, and also getting better at having those conversations with our students that may have a great passion for teaching. They really want to be a teacher, but they're lacking in writing skills or communication skills, or lacking in content, or lacking in, there's so many little things that you have to be able to do to be a teacher. And it's no longer a fallback position. It's no longer a, hey, well, it doesn't work out here, so I guess I'll just be a teacher. That's not it. So I think we're getting way better at having those conversations, honest but supportive conversations with our students, so that we can then better support them to be great teachers, or we can direct them in other ways to put their passions. So that's kind of, I'm all about the honesty and support.
That's actually a good point, because I hear less today in 2020. Yeah, I guess I'll just teach, as if it's something I'll do, versus people saying, I know I want to go into this. So good points. Jeanne.
I'm going to piggyback right off of that, because that sort of leads into field placements. So I know New Jersey has some pretty stringent certification requirements for teachers. Our candidates are required to do 225 hours in the field before a full 15-week semester of student teaching. So our kids end up with 4 different field placements throughout their time with us. And so we require them to make sure that they are in an urban diverse district, that they have, some special ed experience, regardless of what their certification area might be. So I think the more experience in the classrooms is fantastic, because they're getting a wide perspective. In New Jersey, it's local control. So kids grow up and go to school in the same district. They don't often encounter an awful lot of people who are in different circumstances than they are. And so by asking them to go and look in different schools, it broadens their perspective of what they thought education was. That being said, I think one of the big areas where teacher prep falls down is when we do put our candidates out in the field, we don't train the teachers enough. We don't collaborate enough with the mentor teachers in the field. Because if you think about it, teacher certification prepares teachers to teach pedagogy. It doesn't prepare them to teach andragogy, how to work with other adults. So we have sometimes some students who get into a situation where they have a great teacher who works really well with kids, but doesn't know how to work with another adult. And usually those are skills that you don't get into unless you're going for an administrative program. So in learning how to manage and supervise other adults. So I think that's an area where we fall down. I think it's an area where there's a tremendous opportunity for universities to start working with the teachers in the district on teacher leadership skills, rather than anointing and appointing. Guess what? You have a student teacher, so And they go, well, I don't know. And so the default is they do whatever was done for them, which in many cases is the dump and run. When we know that today co-teaching is far more effective, not only for the students in that classroom, but for the student teacher, for the teacher candidate, and the mentor teacher as well, because they all build on those skills. So I think one area we really fall down in is working with our mentor teachers, which is something I've been focused on for a while. And I did my dissertation in that. The other thing I think we're getting wrong with teacher preparation is the costs per student to get through programs. The astronomical costs between Praxis Core, Praxis 2, EdTPA, transportation to and from, the professional wardrobe, the extra things that they need to pay for, the subscriptions to the online data management system, et cetera, et cetera. For a lot of kids, especially, I was a first generation college student, and I know, several others of you struggled to get through college at the same time. I had to work my way through. There was no way. I didn't have family that paid for it. I paid off my college loans when I was 45. So, for those candidates, those extra costs are oftentimes very prohibitive and will keep them from advancing, or at least advancing quickly. So I think we need to do something more about those all-encompassing fees that come along with everything.
Thank you for that response. Erica.
I would agree with that, but I'm going to begin with what I believe is going well. I think that in teacher preparation, the standards for teacher prep is very rigorous, and there are very strong accreditation bodies both at the federal and state level. So in terms of monitoring the standards and the quality of preparation across the country, I think teacher prep is doing that fairly well. We're also starting to see some relaxing of some regulations that they had on teacher preparation. Some high stakes assessments are starting to be relaxed. Here in Georgia, they just relaxed off of EdTPA, where it was a requirement for the previous 6 or 7 years. They've now eliminated that as a requirement, and now it's optional for teacher prep programs. And there's a lot of talk now about relaxing some of those regulations, some of the barriers that prevent many new teachers from coming into the field. So I think we're doing that very well. We're moving in that direction. What's wrong with teacher prep is that field and clinical, I believe, is very weak. Field and clinical focus too much on the candidates being the observer and not the co-teacher in the room, as Jeanne just said. And we need to have stronger national and state regulations on what is effective models, but we need the buy-in from the school systems, and that's the problem. The problem is not so much the teacher prep programs and the candidates, it's finding those strong cooperating or mentor teachers who are willing to take on the student teacher. It's getting access to the school. It's requiring a teacher to allow that candidate to actually teach. And it's training those cooperating or mentor teachers so that they can provide effective mentorship and guidance. And it's also pairing the cooperating teachers who are particularly strong or master teachers, instead of pairing them with someone who's just willing to take them for an extra stipend. So I think field and clinical is a major weakness because this is where the candidates learn to apply their curriculum, instruction, and assessment practices. So we can teach them in the classroom till we're blue in the face, but they have to be in front of real 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 16-year-olds to actually understand and develop their craft. I think what we're also doing wrong is the cost. The costs are absurd. Testing, EdTPA was a major cost. It's $300 to get that portfolio scored. And that's money that's not going back to the institution, it's going to the pockets of Pearson. So I had very strong feelings about removing EdTPA, and I'm glad that it was removed. I don't think people understand how much money goes into being a teacher. And in Georgia, the starting salary is $38,000. So that's a huge disincentive for a lot of people, especially if they're bright and smart. They are not going to pay a lot of money to go into a field that they see is really one step above poverty. In 2020, to make $38,000 a year is not a lot of money. So it should not cost them $2,000 to $3,000 to be a teacher in their teacher prep program on top of their tuition and fees for college. So that's something we're doing wrong. We're also failing to diversify the teaching field. We are not doing a good job of recruiting, supporting, and removing barriers for new teachers of color. We're not doing a good job at going out and trying to make teaching attractive to those teachers of color. We are not as a whole doing a good job of supporting those teachers of color and providing them with other opportunities for peer support as well. If there are not many teachers of color in your teacher prep program, you might can partner or link up with an HBCU so that there is a community that they belong to. And too many teacher prep programs outside of HBCUs and MSIs are not taking the diversity and cultural diversity into effect in our programs of study, in our recruitment, as well as in conflict resolution and classroom management. They're just not doing it. And they're certainly not requiring their students to take specific classes on, for example, African-American history. If you're teaching in a predominantly, a school district that is predominantly African-American, then they need to have a class on African-American history or African-American culture on some level. And too many teacher prep programs are not viewing that as important. But then we have a problem with retaining our teachers when they come out into the field, right? So we need to do something on that front, and we need to do something on that front in a major way, because it's a source of a lot of conflict in the classroom. I have some hope that we are going to make some changes over the last year. Of course, there's been a renewed effort on looking at, for example, the school to prison pipeline, looking at the education of Black boys, looking at school discipline procedures. And we need to make that a more systematic focus in our curriculum and in the programs of study for there to be a sustained presence of recognizing and addressing cultural diversity in a major way, and to remove a lot of the barriers and a lot of the academic and achievement gaps that we see in schools. It's going to have to begin with re-educating our teachers.
And the point you mentioned about us not knowing how much it costs to enter the profession, that's going to shock a lot of people. And so for those who are listening, maybe one thing you can do is actually pick up the costs for your teacher, or reimburse him or her for the cost that they have in school. And Jeanne, something I want to go back to, you mentioned, I don't think people really get the fact that when a number of teachers leave the profession, oftentimes it's because of a relationship with the principal or some other dynamic, but it's a human dynamic. Cost per se, yes, but they knew that when they were going in, or they know the cost. But the number one reason we identified in some states was relationship with the principal and others. So that's a good point. We could go on for another, oh, yes, go ahead, Heidi. Sorry, Hannah.
I just want to add one more thing. Like Erica was reading my mind, everything she said at the very beginning. I would add one more thing that I think is wrong is we have a lot of people teaching teachers how to be teachers that were barely teachers themselves. And it's disturbing. We have a lot of teachers that may teach 2 or 3 years, maybe go on to get their master's, go on to get their doctorate, and then they're teaching teachers how to be teachers. And it was refreshing, I know, for my students to know. I came fresh from the trenches, a lot of years in the classroom. When I was an adjunct, they knew I was coming directly from my classroom to their classroom, and we were talking about real classroom stuff. And I don't think we have enough real life teachers that are teaching other people how to be teachers. And the other concern I have, and I think we're doing wrong, is like Erica noted as well, we don't have enough training for our cooperative teachers, and we don't vet our cooperative teachers. In rural Vermont and rural New Hampshire, we're just like, oh, thank you so much for agreeing to take a student teacher. And it might not be the best placement for that student, but within a half an hour of our particular university, we only have so many options. So that's a huge thing we're getting wrong, is not allowing, it was refreshing to see Ithaca in New York say, if we've got a student that wants to go home and they live in New Hampshire, we'll place them in New Hampshire. and that's okay. And they found me, who lives here, to facilitate that. Right now, we're in rural Vermont. We are on the border of New York State, and I've got a plethora of amazing teachers in New York, and Vermont is saying no because they're in New York and we can't send our students from Vermont to New York. So we're doing some things wrong in that vein. So those are just two things I wanted to add that I think we need to do better with.
Yeah, can I add to that as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so two things came into mind immediately. Clear roles and responsibilities for school leadership. We need to do a better job at that. What I mean by that is the school leadership, do they have a clear understanding of when they get pre-service teachers in the building? Do they have a clear understanding of what's supposed to be happening with the mentor teacher and the pre-service teacher? What structures in place do they have in order to make sure that that mentor teacher has the space and lateral to actually do the mentoring, right? Sometimes what I find is the mentor teacher is boggled down with so many responsibilities. They're teaching multiple preps, they have extracurricular activities, they're hosting PDs, and that mentor teacher who may be effective is burnt out. So establishing clear roles and responsibilities from that lens really needs to happen, because if you have a great teacher, let's face it, great teachers are often pulled on to do a lot of things, right? So if you have a mentor teacher who is going to have a pre-service teacher, create some space in that schedule for the mentoring to happen. Oftentimes you get a lot of drive-by conversations, or you get, I can just only give you what I can give you. And a lot of times, although the mentor teacher may have the skills to offer to that pre-service teacher, they can't give all of themselves to that particular role. So establishing clear roles and responsibilities for school leadership to see the mentor teacher as a valuable asset to the pre-service teacher, I think is something that we need to do better. Number two, mentor compatibility has been something that I found that we need to do better. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a strong mentor teacher who is good in whose content is special education, right? But they get placed with a pre-service teacher whose content area is math. Now, that mentor teacher may be able to help with some of the pedagogy, classroom management, routines and structure, how to engage students. But that mentor teacher who's strong in special education might not be able to help in the content area of math, right? So having that pairing is essential. Also, what I found is personality pairing. Sometimes you have pre-service teachers who are more reserved, getting paired with a teacher who would maybe have an A-type personality, and the personalities may not mesh well. So some of those things with mentor compatibility is essential. We got to make sure we place our teachers with mentors who are compatible. And oftentimes what we find is the pool isn't that great to select from, right? Either the great teachers don't want to add another thing onto their plate, or the great teachers have too much on their plate and they can't give their all. So those are some of the things that I found that we need to do better at, the vetting process, and making sure that everyone is on the same page to ensure that we create a space in the environment where that pre-service teacher can thrive.
Great points. Stacy or Chad, you want to?
Yeah, I got 2 quick points. I want to piggyback off of what's been said. I think, compensation, like Richard was indicating, I think that we ask teachers to work for free too often. No other profession is expected to work for very little or no money. So the idea when you take on a teacher candidate, if we're not going to compensate them accordingly monetarily, then let's lighten their load a little bit in the classroom. Compensation doesn't always have to be in terms of money, but it can be giving them some professional status or something. I think that we just really need to think about compensation. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, I know that it's been on people's minds and really thinking about how do we recruit the right people to the profession. I think that's one of the things in Hawaii we've really struggled with. So much of our recruitment turns to the continent, people that are not from here. And so really what that happens is that you have all these people who are walking into situations where there's a deep and painful history of colonialism, and they're not even aware of it. And so it just perpetuates that idea. And I think one of the things that's happened in the past 2 years or 3 years, maybe here, there's a Grow Our Own initiative that the government is actually sponsoring, is that let's get people from the communities to teach in their communities. so we don't have to turn to the continent to bring in outsiders to continue to be here for 2 years and leave. So we're constantly trying to find new teachers. So those are my two ideas. As Richard was talking, I was really thinking about the idea of compensation and who.
And Richard's point about matching people is key. If we mismatch trying to date people the way we put in teachers, it'd be a whole different conversation, and this would be a whole different title, but that's another story. So thanks for bringing that up. And then Chad, people forget that Hawaii is often a part of the United States. You mentioned a continent piece, and you fly in a lot of talent. And I'm glad to hear you trying to grow your own talent from the ground up, because there's some things about Hawaiian history that people would be shocked to learn. So I'm glad you're hearing that. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I was just going to add that as far as teachers leaving the profession, attrition, if we could build in a career or information and growth as it relates to just that career lattice, many teachers feel that they are trapped. I was a broadcaster, and I was a professional. I was good at what I did, and I wanted to be a teacher, but at a certain point, I felt like I was not treated as a professional, and I didn't feel like I was growing. So when I learned about board certification, and that just opened a window for me to do professional education type things like mentoring. So I think we need to do a better job of allowing candidates to know that you can stay in the classroom if you want, and you can continue to evolve and grow and become that professional that so many teachers sometimes don't think that they are.
And what you mentioned is really key, because a lot of my friends who are teachers, who are principals today, they said, I became a principal because it was a chance for me to get leadership experience, a chance for me to get more pay, but I really wanted to stay in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so Catherine Bassett, who we all know, has talked about the importance of building a teacher leadership pipeline while you're still in the classroom.
Right.
You don't have to go into administration to do this. And just a number of friends of mine, and some will love being a principal, but some say, I really wish I was back in the classroom. Well, all great things must come to an end, and we've actually gotten to the hour point. But here's the great thing. This was just part of the group discussion. As many of you know, that I do one-on-one interviews with each person who's interested. And so can I get a hand up if you're interested in a one-on-one interview? Great. And I'll take a hand up for DeCuir. I see hers coming up virtually. And this will give me and the audience the opportunity to go into some deeper questions about what you've talked about. Stacy, for your career, what did that look like? And what did it look like for an alternative path? For Richard, the importance of preparing Black men to become teachers. I was a 5th grade teacher, only 5th grade Black teacher that most of my students had going through school, unless it was PE, and nothing's wrong with that. But in terms of being in the classroom, Heidi, you're doing music. We often think it's the fluffy, feel-good stuff. It's actually a craft that's head and mind, and would like to, do a deeper dive as that relates to working in rural education. If we forget about that, Stacy, Erica, you've gone from high school up. One of the projects I had pitched to some members of a federal body in 1997, because DC used to have a high school program to prep people to teach. We've got to start doing that earlier, so we can talk more about that. Chad, talking about philosophy and bringing in the humanities to the work that we do in training professors. Pedagogy is important, but there's something about the humanities that will add to that, so we can talk more about that. And then Jeanne, the work that you're doing, going to your new job of preparing people for the future and what it looks like. And also to talk about, again, some of the structural and bureaucratic aspects. These are just some of the ideas that we can talk about when we do a one-on-one. But I want to thank all of you for carving out time to have a conversation about teacher preparation. You're all doing the work. We've all grown in the area, but also to raise some of the tough, issues, certification, costs, barriers, obstacles, but also you provided some opportunities that we should think about in terms of hope. So this is Gerard Robinson again with InCharacter. I want to thank all of you for joining and look forward to the next conversation in the future. Thank you.